Hi, friends. My name is Edie Penn, and welcome to my new podcast, PostScript. This podcast is about the scripts we inherit, the social contracts we internalize, and unspoken rules we live by, sometimes consciously, sometimes without realizing it, and how those things shape what we believe, what we tolerate, and how we move through the arenas of our lives. I'm coming to this conversation as someone who spent over 20 years in human resources. And while so much of what I've learned about these scripts and social constructs that we're slaves to is through that work, I know for sure that it applies to you as a regular, everyday person in your regular, everyday life. I've seen how breaking down these constructs has freed people. In many ways, what I've learned is that some of these normal ideas that we repeat at work and in our relationships, at leadership conferences, as parents, walking through our everyday lives, are actually really harmful scripts in disguise. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. One of the most harmful things about some of these frameworks is that they're presented like truth, not a perspective, not this might work for you if, truth. And the harm of that is, it doesn't even acknowledge that the assumption that this works for everyone is sometimes the very problem. Because if it doesn't apply to you, if you do all the things and your life doesn't suddenly improve, you start thinking that the problem is you, not the framework, not the message, certainly not the messenger, you. You start thinking that you're undisciplined. Maybe you're too broken or too sensitive, too resilient or not resilient enough, this or that, whatever, fill in the blank. When really, the framework was never built with you in mind. It was built for somebody with a different set of permissions, a different kind of body, a different relationship to relationships, to risk, to danger, to authority. And when you try to force those things onto your life, you end up worse than you were before. That's not self-help, friends. That's self-destruction. So the goal of this podcast and how I want you to engage with it is not to take what I say as gospel. God, that's the opposite of what I want you to do. It's to practice discernment. I want you to listen and ask yourself, does this idea make me feel more free or more restrained? Does it expand my thinking or shrink my options? Does it help me feel more like myself, or does it make me feel like I need to be someone else to be good or good enough? I also want you to pay attention to the voice behind that message. Whose perspective is that? What assumptions are they making about your life, your body, relationships, resources, safety, access, your reality? Does it even make sense to you? To be clear, this isn't about me. It's why this podcast will be audio only. Don't get it twisted though. I have a voice for radio and a face for TV. I just don't want you to become an Edie Penn fan. I mean, you can, because I'm fabulous. But the point is not worship. The point is practice. The point is that you get better at thinking for yourself so that you can take what's useful and leave the rest and build something that actually fits your life in community, and not just what sounds good, what's trending, what's on the New York Times bestseller list, what's packaged well, or the latest thing you saw on your IG feed. What's true, what's aligned, and what's for you. Enjoy the episode. Hi, friends. Welcome to the 6th episode of Postscripts. I'm so happy you've decided to join me, and I'm excited about our conversation today. But first, an apology. I owe you all an apology. Since the very first episode, I've been asking you all to think about scripts at a very individual level, interrogate inherited scripts, and amend them for yourself. For example, I've said, define what love means to you, and pack it so you can make sure you want to buy everything in the love box. That's an encouragement for a personal practice. But today, what I realized is I've been encouraging you all to think too small. I somehow have been completely missing something that's right there. Meaning is relational. When you describe love for yourself, you are better enabling yourself to explain and communicate it to others. However, once you've done that, you've given new meaning to that word, and its life lives between you and the people to whom you communicate it. Scripts cannot simply be accepted or rejected in the abstract. They have to be understood in the context of the relationship that produced them and the relationships in which they're being used. After time, you and that person or those people can use love as a shorthand because you've accumulated time and actions and understanding between you. Once you've defined it, it likely doesn't need to be defined again. Love can again act as a shorthand. You've amended the script. This actually made me think of a book I read some time ago called Word by Word by Corey Stamper. At the time, Corey was a lexicographer for Merriam-Webster. In her book, she describes English as a child, one we must love and nurture into being, but that, like a child, it does what it wants. Quote, we dress it in fancy clothes and tell it to behave, and it comes home with its underwear on its head and wearing someone else's socks. She laments that we will never really be the boss of it, and that is why it flourishes. Scripts, like language, are like this too. But scripts, like definitions, are malleable. What defines them are the relationships which give rise to them between parents and children, partners, coworkers, neighbors. A great example of this is from another author, Ta-Nehisi Coates, when he reflects on the N-word. He says, words don't have meaning without context. He gives the example of his wife calling him honey, which obviously is acceptable. But if he was walking down the street and a strange woman called him honey, it wouldn't be. This is because we understand that he has a relationship with his wife, and hopefully he has no relationship with that strange woman. Likewise, you likely have words, phrases, or understandings between you and people with whom you're in a relationship that don't have meaning outside of that relationship. A great example of this is jargon used in your profession or at your job. I recently attended a continuing legal education class for employment law. At some point during the CLE, one of the lawyers proclaimed, "There's no such thing as a 1099 employee," and I almost cheered. As an HR professional, it grates my brain to hear someone referred to as a 1099 employee, as people who are categorized as 1099 are explicitly not employees. This isn't hair splitting or tomato. It has real legal effect that matters. The relationship of that person working under a 1099 to the organization with which they are contracted is not employee. It legally cannot be. But people outside of the law, and Lord, even some HR professionals, have compressed employee and 1099 like an unopened zip file, which can present potential legal risks. And in the same way, when we compress scripts and then use them without further interrogation, we've disconnected them from the appropriate relationship, and then we expect it to work. And like an organization calling their 1099 contractors employees, you can end up in hot, expensive water. Here's the thing. You already know this and practice it, but the place where it comes up isn't, unfortunately, in telling someone you love them or you think they look professional. It mostly arises in disagreements. I dated a guy once who took it upon himself to, quote, do me a favor. He put new tires on my car. Now, I'm a car girl and I don't mind doing things like that, getting an oil change, getting new tires, etc. I actually kind of like it. But I love when someone does something for me that I could do for myself. That says, I'm thinking of you, I consider you, I'm orienting to you, and that's the stuff. So, of course, I was elated. About a week later, I got a flat tire, and I was so confused. So I went to him and I was like, where'd you get these tires from? He mentioned some local mechanic shop that sold used tires. Used tires, sir? And an argument ensued. Why would you tell me you put new tires on my car instead of telling me you got used tires? Thing is, at the time, I didn't really care that they were used. I did care immensely that they were, quote, new to me, but not new tires, because I thought new tires only had one meaning. Now, this may seem like a silly example, but I cared a lot, and it's the first time I can think of where I actively thought, what else are we not agreeing on? Does this feel familiar to you? Are there areas in your relationships where you haven't properly managed the expectations because you haven't defined a word, a phrase, or a core value? What can you do to get aligned? Let's get to your questions. So, Edie, are you saying words don't have meaning? That can't be right. No, I'm not saying words don't have meaning. I'm saying words don't have fixed meaning, independent of context and relationship. Dictionaries, the thing we think is an authority on language, not our fault, by the way, that was definitely drilled into us. Dictionaries describe common usage, not fixed meaning. And if you don't believe or agree with me, go find some of Corey or Merriam-Webster's YouTube page descriptions on words like irregardless. Thank me later. Or maybe don't, if you don't particularly like the word irregardless. Relationships determine which usage fits. Question 2. Isn't this just semantics? I mean, I think both my 1099 employee and new tire examples show that this isn't semantics. How we define a word, a core value, or a mantra can have real consequences. My examples potentially have legal and safety consequences. Maybe yours are less critical. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. And finally, Edie, how do you avoid constantly misunderstanding each other? Well, we've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating as many times as I can. It's the Ted Lasso rule. Be curious, not judgmental. When you get curious about what someone has said to you, you invite explanation. Sometimes you can just say, when you say new, do you mean new to me or never been used? How many times have you walked away from a conversation about work or after school pickup, where you're going to meet up for happy hour, or what was said in the article you just read, and thought to yourself, wait, I don't actually know what that means? I'm not introducing new things to you, friends. I'm just illuminating where they are. So, friends, that's all the news that's fit to print for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and joining me here. I'm so excited for you all to be on this journey with me. And another episode will be dropping next month. Be on the lookout for it. In the meantime, lead with curiosity and practice interrogating what is true, what's aligned, and what's for you. Bye.